How many of you have a resume right now? Someone says, I need it this very second to be sent via email. Can you send it and be absolutely unequivocally proud about it? Okay, here's a few hands here. How many of you feel that your resume needs a little bit of work? I hope all hands go up because everyone's here. What we're going to talk about today is you. I'll start with the fact that it is not bragging if it's a fact. Let me say that again. It is not bragging if it is a fact. Last year, I was nominated and selected as the District 45 Toastmaster of the Year, which represents over 100 speaking clubs within New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and 3 eastern provinces in Canada. It's not bragging. It's a fact. I don't go around saying, oh, look at me, I was a Toastmaster of the Year. No, but my resume says it. It's going to absolutely say it. This resume right now is your story. It is your book. Not everybody reads. Not everybody reads the whole book anyway. What you need to do is ensure that when you're writing this resume that people want to start continuing to read it. Here's your chance to brag about yourself. Have your story come alive. It's about personal branding. How do you brand yourself when everybody in this room might be applying for the same job? So everyone says, you have 15 people, all of them say I was a collector. That's great. I did well as a collector. Great. I was a top performer as a collector. Still great. So your numbers go from here to about here. How do you differentiate yourself? That's what we're going to talk about today, is how do you bring your story out on paper so it starts the conversation. On the outside, when it comes to resumes, is there are algorithms run against it. You run it through Monster or any one of those websites out there, your resume, they're looking for keywords that are on your resume. We'll talk about what some of those keywords should be, and what some of them shouldn't. So let's start with the resume. Because as we go through today, I want you thinking about what you can do to enhance one if you already have it, or how do you start one when you do. And I will start right here. On your calendar, the first thing you do when you walk out of this room is you put on your calendar a reoccurring appointment that says every 3 months update your resume and bio and talent profile and everything else that is about you. Your biography, whatever you do to tell people about who you are in your package, have it ready and updated on a quarterly basis. The pain, the suffering, the anxiety, the fear, all of that gets rolled into, I have to put together my resume, and the hours of work you see ahead, once a quarter, 5 minutes. Update it if you need to. Don't update it if you don't have to. Read it. Edit it. On that quarterly basis, we're going to talk about what you do with this thing. So on a quarterly basis, it doesn't mean look through it and say, that's good. I've written this resume you have in front of you for the last 8 years. I picked a typo up on it last week. So when it comes to resume writing, is there a right or a wrong way? There is, okay. What are some ways that you think are not right or wrong about a particular resume? What are the things that...
You have to know what kind of position you're applying for. You have to structure it properly. Like I was looking at yours, for example. You know, you have a very strong work history. You're consistently changing positions and continuously evolving. My own work history isn't quite as solid as that. I went through a period of unemployment before I came to work here. I like to use a functional resume from what I've had to experience in the past. It works for doesn't, you know, point out the fact that I was unemployed for a period of time.
Okay. And that can build in. The one thing, and the points that you're bringing up are very good points of how many different types of resumes do you want? Tom Dowd's personal opinion, 1. I can hand it to somebody down the hall, or I can hand it to somebody down the street. It should be the same.
See, the only question I have about that, because I actually wrote that down as a question to ask you, is like a lot of times when you're applying for jobs outside of Bank of America, they don't care about certain goals, certain things that we do here. Like, I mean, on my resume, I have like exceeded 112% of PPH goal. That means absolutely nothing to anybody that's outside of the bank. Like, you know what I mean? So that, but it's important if I'm in the bank because somebody that's been in credit acquisitions will look at that and be like, oh wow, yeah, she did a great job on that. Like,
I'm going to take what you just said and I'm going to expand it to my own definition. People on the street don't care that you are 112 PPH. People down the hall don't care that you're 112% of PPH. I don't know what PPH is. I do. But you have to go in with the assumption someone down the hall isn't going to know what it means. Because what it means is, are you goal oriented? When you're given a goal, any goal, are you able to achieve it? When you're given a different goal in a different job, are you able to achieve it? That expands your story just a little bit better because you're not just concentrating on one metric. But what you want to do is stay completely away from acronyms. Or if you are going to have an acronym, make sure that it is spelled out. Make sure that somebody at the service station could understand what your resume says. A lot of times we get so caught up into the company terminology. What you can't have on a resume is somebody guessing. Because if you're creating guessing, as an interviewer, I don't like to guess, so therefore it's a lot of work, and I don't like a lot of work, so I'm just going to skip it. And so what you're trying to tell me is you're 115% of something so powerful that meaningful to you is meaningless to somebody else because it didn't resonate. It didn't relate to that person. Your job in your interview is, or in the resume, is to resonate with that person that's potentially going to sit across the table from you. And the reason why I say you want one resume is it will force you to speak in a language that everyone can understand. Why do you need one for on the street or one for in the company? If you're speaking the same language to everyone, assuming that no one's going to understand what I'm talking about and I have to put it in a way that they'll understand it, now we're starting to connect. Because then it creates more good questions that can come out in an interview. Oh, I see you've hit your efficiency goals. What other things were out there? Possibly a quality goal, possibly a productivity goal, an efficiency goal, a sales goal. And now all of these things are starting to come to light. But there isn't a right or a wrong answer to it. There are different styles, and you have to be able to accept those styles. And if you have a gap in your employment, for example, what you want to be able to do is how do you explain that the right way so it's not sitting there like a sore thumb where you're going, here's where I was last employed, and all of a sudden I have years up here, and there's this gap. Put it there. Explain exactly what happened there. I mean, I'm not talking about 10 lines worth of text that say, woe is me. I'm saying, here's what I did in the meantime. Here was my backup plan. Here's the things I did on my side. And there really, truly isn't a gap unless you were sitting around with the remote control just hanging out watching TV. There really isn't a gap. If you made the effort to improve your resume or have some side jobs, there really can't be too much of a gap. And with the unemployment rate where it has been over the last couple of years, you're going to see more and more of that is going to be more and more accepted, knowing that these things happen.
Right, because I always thought, one page, and you've got the front and the back. You have 3 pages, and I've always been told like 1 or 2, and then you have personal information about being married and running. That's okay to put on there because.
All right.
I'm like,
now you've gotten to the meat of my presentation.
I'm like,
first of all, stop listening to the experts, and that includes me. I'm only giving you my opinion. My opinion, however, has, I'm hoping, a little bit of credibility because I've interviewed thousands of people. My father was the HR director for Sears for 25 years. I've been mock interviewed. My resume has been gone over more times than I want to admit. So I have a little bit of credibility. But you don't have to listen to me. and stop listening to the experts that are saying you have to have a resume. You want to listen to an expert. I had somebody come into my office a couple weeks ago and say, my manager told me to take everything off of my resume that had nothing to do with this company that I'm in right now. And I said, you have 15 years of experience. You just wrote off instantly. Put the number of pages that you feel someone will continue reading. I have 3 pages on there because I have 22 years of experience in the financial industry. It's 3 pages. I'm hoping, and if I've constructed it well enough, 3 pages worth of a story you want to continue reading. My recommendation is probably not go over 3 because now you're really starting to, it's a true book by that point. But what you'll start to find when it comes to the resume is when we started talking about style here. Your resume, the first thing I do when I get a resume in my hand or on my system is I don't even read it. I don't bother reading it yet. What do you think I do?
Just look at it, look at the style. Is it friendly to the eye?
Is it friendly to the eye? Where are my eyes naturally progressing and going on this resume? What are the things that are sticking out to me? Spatially, what are catching my attention? Do you use bullets or do you use paragraphs? If you read through mine, it's going to be a little bit of both. What you're finding about it is I am consistent with it. So I'm consistently compact with my information. Hopefully it's clear, it's concise, but it's powerful enough that you're going to continue to read it. I've known some people that have their job description and then the dates right next to it, it's all crammed together, and you're making me very much read through the whole thing. I want things to stick out. So if you want to show a very good, consistent, stable work history, you want the dates to be bold and stick out over here to the right so I can follow chronologically where you go. Do you have to write out a resume chronologically?
No.
No. You can do it based off of skills. Some people like to put all their skills in one place. Maybe all their sales jobs here, all their administrative jobs here, all their outside work here. Any one of those is fine. In fact, you start to see a lot more of that when you get into a very technical type position, like a financial or accounting type position. You do it based off of the actual function of the job. I prefer when it comes to the chronological because they can follow along your story. When we start with, and I will get back to your personal point in just a moment, but when you get to the first part, what do I have? What's the first thing you see outside of my name and address? Which, by the way, is on the left. Is that okay? Okay. Does it have to be in the center? Does it have to be the right? Where do most people put their names and address?
Center.
In the center or top right. Mine's in the left. Does that make me quirky? Make it just a little bit different. That's one thing I want you to take away from today is how are you going to differentiate yourself from the hundreds of people that are applying for jobs? Yes?
Do you list the last like 3 employers you've had, or how many? You don't bore them to death like with every history, do you? Or do you? What do you do? Like, what year do you stop from the last job till now?
The question was that when do you stop putting your experience on there? When the experience has no relevance to what you're doing. I stopped putting on there that I was a lifeguard for 3 years. After a while, knowing that it just didn't help out. I didn't put on the fact that I worked in a bookstore for 3 weeks. Just didn't think that in college. After a while, you start to figure out where you want to put it. But it was interesting. I got that question from someone just a few months ago, and they said, well, I've done all this volunteer stuff. When do I stop putting it on there? It's 10 years old. I said, what meaning does it have for you? It said, well, it got me catapulted to here and catapulted to here, and all of a sudden now I'm leading the disability group that we have here, and I'm working very feverishly on the military support group that we have here. And I said, because it started with this thing over here? And they said, yeah. I said, keep it. If I said I helped my daughter sell Girl Scout cookies, no. But what you really want to do is say, how meaningful is it for you? Not meaningful for the one position you're posting for right now or applying for, but how meaningful is it to you, your story? And so you'll see on my resume quite a few years ago, I was the director of the golf tournament. I raised over $35,000. We raised over $35,000, but I'm very proud of that. I'm okay with the fact that it's 5 or 6 years old. But it's still meaningful to me because it's charitable, it was meaningful, it showed I can balance my work and life and other things that are going on. All of a sudden, this little thing's coming alive. Let's go back now to the personal piece. Go to the last page of my resume and flip it over. You are not allowed to ask anyone in an interview, nor are you allowed to be asked, do you have kids? Do you drive to work? Are you healthy? Read those couple of lines that are there and tell me the story those 3 lines are telling you about who I am on a question you're not even allowed to ask me.
Most likely you're probably stable, at least where you're living, your home environment.
On paper, I am stable. Okay? What else?
That they don't have to worry about you health-wise. Give too much money in the hospital.
So I am healthy. I come into work every single day. I don't miss a day. In 22 years, I've missed 3 days. What else?
That you're proficient with public speaking, and that you add the professional development piece to an organization.
So hopefully I can be considered articulate. I can communicate fairly well. I do some things on the side so I can balance my work, life, and other endeavors and still have success.
Not only does it do that for you, but you can do that for others as well. You can develop others.
So it shows I don't have to come out and say, I can teach you. My resume's telling that for you. So in this personal piece that's out there, not everyone has this personal piece because we have this fear of, I can't share stuff that I'm not allowed to say in an interview. Who said you're not allowed to say? You're just not allowed to be asked. I can ask that question of myself. And all of a sudden, it can actually create a conversation. It can create a link. You can start to relate to the people that could potentially be making decisions about your career. Somebody might come out and say, hey, I just ran a marathon last week. There's nothing wrong with saying that. I'm just starting a conversation. Or someone said, I was having a conversation with someone and they said, hey, I didn't realize you wrote. Nothing wrong with that. And they said, I write children's books. Instant connection. And now all of a sudden we're having a conversation. Or somebody sees that on their desk and they see that relationship to them. There's nothing wrong with that. So it says I'm stable, I'm healthy, I can balance. You haven't had to say a word and all of those things came off the page. How many of you have seen a resume that had something personal on it? Who's standing out now? In a good way. And this isn't about to say, hey, look at me, I'm so special. It's look at me, I can do some special things for you. I can differentiate myself from everyone else that's out there. So let's go back to the profile here. In the beginning of this profile, what is it doing for you as the reader of this resume? So it says, here is my resume condensed in about 4 or 5 lines. And what kind of skills do you see that are in there? Does it say I'm a people person? Kinda. Do I have to come out and say I'm a people person? Please don't write people person on
You don't need to put specifically those words, but I mean, you have talented leader with diverse management expertise.
Okay, so there's diversity.
Demonstrated experience below it.
There's management. There's leadership. So I'm going to differentiate between hard skills and soft skills. What do you think the difference is? What is a soft skill? I just mentioned a couple.
Something that's a little more general, something that's not specific.
I'm a good communicator. I'm a good leader. I'm a people person. I love animals. It's a soft skill. What did I just tell you about me? That silence is enough of the answer. I haven't told you a lot. I just told you what everyone else tells you what they want to hear. I'm really interested in your job. I'm a people person, I have good leadership, I'm a communication mate. I haven't told you anything. So I come over here and I say that I have skills associated with risk, with strategies, making credit decisions, change management. All of a sudden, I'm now talking about hard skills that are here, and it's a little bit of a blend of both to say, I can manage people, I can manage processes, I can manage change, I can manage administration, I can lead, I can follow, I can run the company line, I can be creative, I can show initiative. I have all of these things that are coming out in just a little bit of a paragraph of a profile for me. So do you think you need a profile, or do you think you would need, what do most people put on the top of their resume?
An objective.
An objective. What's an objective going to tell you?
What you want, your goal.
What you want? Well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Goal.
What your goal is. If somebody has a position in the paper, or there's a position you're interested in, and you say, my objective is to get your position, because isn't really that what you're saying? Isn't that what you're telling them with your objective? I really want your position, that's why you're holding my resume? I call it wasted space. I think with an objective, you're speaking the obvious to somebody. I wouldn't be holding your resume if you weren't interested in my position. I once saw an objective on a resume that said, I will work like a dog for peanuts. It's no better or worse than any other objectives that says I'll work for you and I really want your position. I went home, my wife said, you're barking up the wrong tree. But it gets the same response. So why waste that space saying, I really want something that's really obvious? And remember, we're talking about the one resume. You can hit send immediately. If I have an objective for every single position that's out there, I'm not telling you the right story. I'm telling you what you want to hear. Is that what you want to do? Yes.
I didn't have an objective or a profile on mine because I kind of thought you put that in the cover letter, and so I didn't put anything like that on a resume.
Yeah, cover letter is an interesting little debate, and I have some opinions about it, and they are just Tom Dowd's opinions. I would say internally, you don't need a cover letter. I tell you, everybody knows what you want to do. I think the cover letters in today's society, externally as well, is I think they're just becoming so fluffy, and there are so many coaches out there that will explain what you need on a cover letter. You've just repeated your resume, and you haven't really gotten my attention. What is happening is if you send it out there and you put it on Monster, for example, they're running algorithms against words. So nobody's really reading it to begin with the thousands of people that are out there. What you want is a resume that's so powerful you can't put it down. And so when I start with a profile, for example, is I'm beginning you, it is the first introductory chapter to my book. If I keep reading that, I'm going to keep reading. If I like what I see, I'm going to keep reading. And I'm going to keep going down the resume and say, yeah, this makes some sense. And I'm going to keep reading. When you have an objective, if it doesn't meet their objective or it becomes so silly or so obvious, they may not keep reading anyway. That's why I'm okay with having more than one page, because I'm confident enough to say my profile tells enough of a story that it's broad enough, but there was enough details in there that will explain what I needed to say for you to keep reading. Let's talk about some of the words that are out there. Up until a few years ago, my resume used to say, assisted on this project, helped out, was along for the ride. Because isn't that what it's saying? I helped you out. I was one of the masses that was there. I participated. I was on a team. What is that saying about you?
Not a leader.
What? I'm sorry?
Not a leader.
It's just saying you're just along for the ride. You're not a leader. You're just kind of there. So you haven't told me anything. It's filler. It's It's resume filler is what you've just done. So how do you combat that? What are some other words that you can use?
Collaborate.
Collaborate.
Increase.
Increase. Accomplish. Led. Managed. Took initiative. Primary. Contact. Any one of these becomes so much more powerful than assisted. Take the word assisted off your resume. When it comes to running the edits, spell check is nice. Spell check is not the answer. Thus, the word manger has shown up on many resumes. So when you do get the call, you can put that out there immediately. I've seen far too many people say, here's an opportunity, and they spend the next 5 hours of their life in front of a computer, writing up their resume, putting all the effort in, probably rushing through it, probably not editing it the way that they should, and probably just hitting send, and there might be some grammatical errors. The first grammatical error I'll see as an interviewer is I might stop reading. Style things are completely different than editing things. If you have manger written on your resume, I'm probably going to stop reading. And you might be the greatest asset ever. But if you can't take the time to make your 1, 2, or 3 pager perfect, what am I going to get? Somebody once told me in an interview, and it's the same thing with resumes, is you're going to put your best foot forward. If my best foot forward has spelling errors and grammatical errors, it's only going to go downhill from there. Think about that. The HR director who was telling me that actually equated, his analogy was, it's like going on a first date. You're going to dress up, you're going to look the nicest, you're going to have this. After that, it's all downhill from there. Make sure that that resume is at the top of its game. In each quarter, find some way to creatively edit it and make sure that you're strengthening it just a little bit more. On an annual basis, I actually have it in January that says update your goals or update what you've accomplished over the previous years numerically. So let's talk a little bit about the job descriptions itself. What do you want within a job description? Where it says, this is who I worked for, how long I did it, and where I did it. And by the way, when you talk about dates, my suggestion is use the month and year. If you're using only years, are you trying to hide something? Or, story-wise, I can do the linkage now, and it shows that you're detail-oriented, because you know exactly where you were at all points in your life. Once again, these are the stories that are coming out that are not necessarily have to be said. So what should a job description say?
It should have these key words in it now.
It should have those key words.
Responsibilities and accomplishments.
Okay, so let's start with the responsibility. Your answer was right on. Your responsibilities and accomplishments. What we find a lot of times is a list of skills or a list of accomplishments, and they're bulleted. So again, let's go back to, is it pleasing to the eyes? Potentially. A lot of bullets say I was top performer, I hit incentive 8 months in a row, I did all these things. But what I found when it comes to all of those bullets is they take up the left side and there's wasted space over here to the right side. So there's a spatial thing that gets my attention when it comes to bullets, and when you're using bullets, it almost feels like you're taking me down this path of check, 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 check. So on the accomplishment side, be careful that it's not a checklist, because now you're boring. But let's go back now to the job responsibilities. You want to be able to tell anyone that I can tell down the hall or down the street what your accomplishments, or excuse me, what your job responsibilities are. I need to know what you did or what you're doing. And it should be in an easily, I can figure out fairly easily what you did in that job. Here's a however. The however shouldn't be, oh look, I collect accounts that are past due, and everyone else who's following you says I collect accounts that are past due. Everyone else is going to have that. You don't want to call your department something that where the name has changed 17 times over. If you collect, put collection so someone can understand what you're talking about. Don't get caught up in the terminology of positions you have. Put the position that somebody down the hall or down the street is going to be able to understand it. What happens is that we describe the position so well, it should be written up in the paper on what happens when someone's going to come in and replace you. Because it's so laid out, here's all the things I need you to do, but you haven't told me what you've accomplished yet. So I break that paragraph down into 3 things. The first is, you have to tell me what you were doing so I have an understanding of what was expected of you. The next is something eye-popping. Give me something on there that has some meat. If you say I collect accounts that are delinquent, you haven't told me a whole lot except the job responsibility. But if you collect on a portfolio that's $5 million on average per month, now you have my attention. $5 million needs to be put in the right context, but you got my attention. Or if you've had any management experience, I've managed as many as 20 people on a team. Or I created reports that were spread out to a few hundred people on a regular basis. Now you're putting a number that can catch my attention. That's that eye-popping thing. I was able to create, I was the project initiator or creator, something along those lines that says, I did something that was very important and of value when we were able to reduce our talk time by X. We reduced our cost by X. We did this, and it's a number that catches my attention. The next thing is an accomplishment. If you can only put 1 or 2 or 3 accomplishments on there, and you had to narrow it down, what is the one thing that will stick out in that particular job that you're describing there that says you are differentiating yourself from everyone else that's out there?
Are you saying only put 1 on there? Or
1, 2, or 3. But in a way that it looks nice, it's not bragging if it's a fact, it's not checklisted, and your story is being told. So if you were considered an all-star, I would say down the street, I don't know what an all-star is. But I would say, I do understand that I was considered a top performer, parentheses, all-star, 3 of the last 4 years. Or I was in the top 10% in performers on my team for X number. Or I achieved the goals in front of me 10 out of 12 months, where I was considered a consistent top performer, and then what it follows up with. So all of those things start to tie together. So what questions or comments do you have?
Well, mine is about, you have a lot of dates and stuff on here, and you go back quite far, and I'm trying to de-age myself, so to speak, because, you know, there is some bias out there once you get above 50, let's say. And so I don't have any of that age stuff on there.
You don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face. You don't want to take the great things that have made you who you are as a person because you don't want to have someone be biased about your age. And we have to be very careful as interviewers, as recruiters, as people that are making these decisions not to do that to begin with. And I think you're starting to see a lot more of that now as we're just looking for the right person, the right talent. If you go in with that mentality and confidence level and you have the skills to do the job, I try to make sure that your story tells that. So you may not necessarily, I'd probably say batch some of your dates together might be a little bit more helpful. There's some other things that you want to put towards the tail end of this. Is what makes you an asset? What makes you someone I have to have on my team? It's not always going to be the experience you have at this company. Make sure your outside endeavors are included, and that includes volunteerism. It includes extracurricular work that you've done out there. One of my best friends who I know was in the military reserves for 15, 20 years. hands me his resume after he's been out of work for 2 years, and he says, hey, can you take a look at this? And I said, hey, where's your military background? He said, I don't know. Think of the story that's telling. You're in the military. You're fighting for this country. You are a leader. You've been put through a lot. You've balanced family, work, personal. You've balanced all this stuff, and you haven't bothered to put that on here for a weekend, a month, for years. Your time is occupied. Those things have to be on. The volunteer time that's out there. Go back and say, what are the things that have made you who you are? I know people that do stuff on the side. They sew. They're a landlord. They do all of these things that tell who you are as a person. Make sure that they're included.
You mentioned the LinkedIn and the Facebook thing. I don't use either one, never have. Is that something that maybe I should get so that people who are looking at resumes, I mean, is that typical for most people who are looking at resumes to go there and look at what you do on Facebook and LinkedIn or whatever?
Well, on Facebook I have 2 friends, so no. It's up to you. I mean, I joined Facebook. I have...
I mean, but is it something that could be an advantage as far as getting an interview?
An advantage or a disadvantage depends who you're applying with and when they're doing it, and I can't determine whether you would or not. I would go in with the expectations of, if you do have people, you will look at it. That's the expectation I go. I try to keep my Facebook, I try to keep my comments fairly minimal, but fairly benign.
When you get a stack of interviews and you're going through and you narrow it down to 5 or 6 or whatever that you want to maybe look into as an interview, do you physically, I mean, do you go to Facebook and look up these people's names and search?
I personally don't. Companies are doing it, and that percentage is significantly on the rise.
So is it, if you're one of those 5 or 6, is it better to have a Facebook or not to?
That's where I was going next.
I mean,
so is it an advantage or a disadvantage? Here's where it becomes your disadvantage. If on Facebook you are treating it as a social network and you're using it to talk about all the things that you've done out there and hanging out with your friends and family, and you really, I mean, and you're caught up in the chats on the regular basis, and it's just going regularly, and you're like, oh, I can't stand the politics, I can't stand this. You're putting yourself in an awkward situation. You may want to, you have to think about that. I try to keep mine fairly benign. I mean, I'll put comments out there to friends from high school and college, but I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, you should have seen what I did at happy hour. I mean, I try to stay away from those comments, or if I see someone who posts something and it has poor language, or it's inappropriate, or it's really political, or really religious, and something I just want to stay away from, I'll actually delete the comment from my post. On the LinkedIn side, I'm going to stay very professional there. But here's where the disadvantage is if you go to LinkedIn, for example. Your resume, your LinkedIn, your Facebook are your personal brand, whether you want them to be or not. So if you go on to LinkedIn and you said, I worked at this company, here are the dates, worked at this company, here are the dates, or you just say, here's my current job and that's it, and someone says, go look at me, I'm on LinkedIn. My story is, you're just looking for a bunch of people to network with, and you're really not even really networking. Your story isn't being told on LinkedIn the way that it should be told. If you're going to go in, go all in, and do it right. Treat it like it's a resume, have your descriptions written up well enough, have it with the same thing with key accomplishments, key goals you might have, key experiences that you have, volunteerism, clubs or stuff that you do, whether it's Toastmasters or the National Speakers Association. Those are the things that I've added in there. The things that I've done on the side that shows my balance is in there. You have to go all in, and I'll tell you, 75% of the LinkedIns that I see are just because someone wanted to all of a sudden get connections, and all you're doing is collecting names. Those names you're collecting are reading your LinkedIn and seeing that you're not detail oriented, you could potentially be perceived as you're lazy of just going in and creating it. I would say if you do it, go all the way you were there. I've seen far too many people say, I've collected for 4 years, so therefore your 4 years is worth 2 lines. Give that 4 years something worth reading about, and give it something that's powerful enough, and you can diversify yourself. It's in there. If you were given a task force or a special project, those can become separate entities on the resume itself. Go back to my resume, take the 22 years off, take the dates off, cut off the entire first page if you want, and say, is it still worthy of being a good resume? And if the answer is yes, that's where you want to go with it. You might not have as much to write, you will, trust me. But build it up so it's telling a story, so someone can see an up-and-comer, someone who's stable, who's been at the same job for 5+ years, who has really 10 years of the working experience. Those are the things you want to sell.
That was kind of my question. Like, obviously, I'm a bit older, and when I was younger, I had a whole bunch of jobs. But for the past 15 years, I've only had 2. Is it okay to, like, you know, you always hear everybody's opinion, but they said that really you only have to include the last 10 years on your resume if that's what you chose to do. They're mostly looking at the past. My question is, like, I have concentrated mine on the past 15 years only. Because before that, it was, you know, just a lot of miscellaneous jobs when I was younger. Is that okay, or should I really go further back?
I'll go back to what I said earlier, and that is, who is they, and what's the word only mean? How do you want your story to be portrayed? So what you might want to do is on the bottom, because no one says you have to have the resume that looks exactly like this. I might take them, actually, both of your experiences where you're saying, listen, I have a ton of experience. I'm not sure where to put it. Pick and choose what you want to include. And so what you want to do is maybe you say, here's my first 10 or 15 years of experience, and then you put additional work experience includes. And then you can have a paragraph. Maybe you call that the job, additional work experience, and then you can put some things, a paragraph of some of the things that you've done, so those skills aren't lost. You know, if you have editing experience, writing experience, sales experience, face-to-face experience, all these things that will be helpful in the world that make you who you are not made because of the last 10 years. You are made because of your whole being. Use that whole being to your advantage for spelling out your story.
If you do that, though, and you do the additional work experience, should you put the dates, or can you just do like a paragraph and say, you know, also worked as a teller? You know, like, because years ago I worked for Fleet Bank twice, you know, as a teller and a branch assistant, but it was so long ago that should you, because then I don't want to get involved in dates, because then I had jobs that were, you know, 6 months.
I would put additional work experience includes bank teller, assistant management. You know, maybe you put parentheses fleet. So you don't have to go into all the details, but someone can still see that it's there and that you can use it to your advantage.
You say only to have one resume, but I know that some jobs I've gone for, I haven't even gotten an interview because I had too much experience in education and stuff. You know, so I almost wanted to devalue it or de-emphasize it somehow.
You can do one of two things. You can make it a little bit more generic so people can see the breadth of knowledge and experience you have without being too overboard, or start reaching a little bit higher for some things that you may not necessarily feel you're skilled for, but in reality you are. Last question.
I've had 3 different jobs in the last 2 years. So, but that's not, like, I got done in my first one that I've been for 4.5 years to move into this area, and then the last 2 that I've had like the layout situation or organizational restructure or whatever you want to call it. So, I mean, that looks really bad.
You can't control some things that are out there. Your story just needs to be able to say that. And I think sometimes we're so afraid of saying the word layoff, restructuring, staffing reductions, because we don't want a resume to say, it's not you, gang, it's not. You had no part of that decision. You worked extremely hard, and your resume should show that you worked extremely hard. And the fact that you're looking for a new job should come out and be transparent as to the reasons why. Don't get caught up in you've had 3 over 4 years. I'd say good for you. You're flexible. You're easily adaptable. That's what it's just told me.
To me, that just doesn't look good to, you know, because I don't like to switch jobs at all. And so, you know what I mean? So it looks better for a person who has been at one job for 10 years instead of like 8 jobs in 10 years.
So what you want to do is, if you're saying that on paper you look you're not very stable job-wise, then find stability somewhere else. And that includes volunteer time, that includes your personal stuff. Those are the things that tell your story on the bottom half that says, I'm a stable person.